Hi everyone, thanks for watching. You can support our work on our website ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channels on YouTube, BitChute and Brighteon. And remember to hit the bell for notifications. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook. To be sure not to miss any of our shows, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website ageoftruth.tv.
Hello everyone and welcome to this special edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Denmark. It's the 27th of May 2025 and this is a very special live edition of our show. We are live today and our producer of Age of Truth TV, Lauge Felix Black, is standing by in the chat room in order to take your questions later on in the show, should you have some questions for our fascinating guest. He has been with us before, many times actually. He's a fiery Italian gentleman who's a successful author of a string of books called Confessions of an Illuminati. He is a former member of the Masonic Executive Committee of Monte Carlo and an ex-Illuminati. He has just published a new book, Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 12. History, secret societies, and the politics of the Jesuit New World Order and their Luciferian Court. We will also be discussing the recent death of Pope Francis and the new American-born Pope, Pope Leo. Leo Zagami. Good evening from Denmark and welcome to all of our viewers on Age of Truth TV. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us for this live stream. We are live right now here from Denmark and Palm Springs, California. First of all, please like our videos and subscribe to our channel and hit the bell for notifications. We have a really amazing show for you today with a very special guest who's been with us many times. He's a good friend of the show. And we would like you, our audience, to participate. And we hope that you will give him some questions today. First, we're going to start with me interviewing him. And then Lauge, our producer, is ready. Say hi to the viewers, Lauge. We can't hear you.
Hello everyone. Hi, I'm Lauge Felix Black here from Age of Truth TV. So great to see you all virtually here on our live stream with Leo Zagami tonight. We have been looking very much forward to this and to present his latest book in his series. And we also want to include you as much as we can here on our live stream. So as we are going forward with the interview, please ask your questions in the chat and we will bring them forth to Leo Zagami later on in the show. So please don't hesitate, bring all your questions and we will try our best to bring all of them to him.
Great. So post your questions in the comment section and Lauge will take care of all of it. But let's now go to Palm Springs in California and say hi to our good friend Leo Lion Zagami. How are you, Leo?
It was a pleasure to be with you and your audience, and also Lage behind the scenes, getting everything ready, maybe for some questions also. I hope that's the case because this book is the last installment of my confession series, and it's the most relevant one because it brings you to meet the controllers of the control, the controllers of the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the think tanks, the politicians, the businessmen. It's like for many years people have asked me, why don't you tell us who is behind it all? But this was the main thing I had to do for this book: discern facts from fiction and give this book the opportunity to be a credible challenge to the controllers, which are the Jesuits, who are also known as the Company of Jesus or the Society of Jesus, an order, a religious order of seemingly innocent priests that has been around for almost 500 years. And for that, I'm very grateful that maybe the Holy Spirit guided me in the last few months of Pope Francis' life, and I ended up this book the day after his departure from Earth, and that was basically the preamble for me having a great success with a book that really deserves a good reading from all of you.
That's amazing, and it could not be more important at this point after the death of Pope Francis. And now we have this new American-born Pope, Pope Leo, not Leo Zagami, but Pope Leo. And we're going to talk about that because you say it's the last installment of your long and very successful series, Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 12.
We've been talking about confessions for how many years together? I mean, a long time, you know. Because, I mean, it's been like since my days in Italy. And now, of course, I had to flee Italy because of what I was writing in this book. So that was the main reason. And I even changed my my citizenship. I'm no longer Italian. I'm an American. So it actually it brought me to have a lot of problems, you know, exposing these people, especially in Europe, where at least for my own personal experience, the freedom of speech and expression and what you can write in a book is limited. In Italy, in particular, because of the laws, which are very restrictive.
Right. Yeah, I know. And it's been incredible to follow you for all of these years and all the shows we've done. And people can see our previous shows on our channel, obviously. But I mean, now this is so important. Your new book is about all of this. We're going to go into the content. But let's talk about the new Pope, Pope Leo. Your name, brother? Really? Well, so wasn't Pope Francis supposed to be the last pope, also according to you? He was called the Black Pope, but now that he's gone, if he is truly dead, you can address that as well. There's this new pope from America, from Chicago. So is he also a pawn of the Illuminati and, you know, part of the satanic globalist New World Order agenda?
Yes, this Pope is a little bit more insidious, though, a bit more difficult to detect because he's trying to somehow please that conservative element in the Catholic Church that was very unhappy with the way Pope Francis was conducting the church. He was the first Jesuit, as you know, and he had prepared for the last few years in Rome his future successor. So there is actually confirmation of that, and I talked about it also on leozagami.com, where, you know, I always relay my latest articles. However, he is the last pope because last year Pope Francis and the Jesuits, the late Pope Francis, published an unprecedented 151-page document, which I discuss in this book, shockingly entitled The Bishop of Rome, Primacy and Synodality in Ecumenical Dialogues and Responses to the Encyclica Ut Unum Sint, which was this encyclica which was written and published at the time of John Paul II. Now, what does this mean for the Church? It means that from the very moment he started his homilies, his public appearance, this Pope has invited to the union of all Christians, not only Catholics. And to do that, the papacy is almost seen as an impediment. So he is, of course, now promoting, first of all, installed in the last few days, his installment also as the Bishop of Rome. He has done the traditional Mass in San Giovanni in Laterano, which is the oldest church in Rome, where the Bishop of Rome is consecrated to his job. And then he also met with the mayor of Rome, calling himself a Roman, and renovating this concept of Bishop of Rome. Now, we always saw that the Bishop of Rome concept is present with the papacy, but he will make it even more relevant, because by stepping down from that papal supremacy, from that throne of Peter's legacy, he will have the possibility of getting also the Orthodox churches closer to him. And in fact, in the last few weeks, Bartolomeo I, who was present at the inauguration with this new Pope, who is the Patriarch of the Orthodox, and is working with this ecumenical movement of Orthodox churches to bring them closer to the Catholic Church. You understand, this is kind of unprecedented that they are coming all together, and the missing link seems to be, though, always the Patriarch of Moscow, which is also a political, not only a religious thing. Of course, there is a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. This conflict doesn't seem to have quieted down, even if Trump tried his best. But there is also a religious reason why this is happening. The Orthodox Church is primacy from Moscow over Ukraine, that then decided in 2018 to shift to Bartolomeo I, which is in Constantinople, in Istanbul, and has now invited this new Pope to Nicaea. Now, Nicaea is the place where, as you know, there was the famous council that decided the future of Christianity in the very early days of Christianity. So Pope Leo XIV, though, calls himself this way because he's a follow-up to Pope Leo XIII. There is a long history of Leo popes, let's say, and so if you want, I can tell you why he decided in particular Pope Leo XIII, who was himself a very different character under many aspects. He had studied with the Jesuits. This Pope instead is a Pope that comes from an Augustinian background. For those who don't know, the Augustinians are friars. They are very much into non-stability in their vows, so they can move from one monastery to another, and they are, though, like the Jesuits, very much into education, aside from their missions with the poor. Education is a very important factor also for the Jesuits, because by educating the elite, by educating the people that go to their universities, prestigious like Georgetown, Fordham, and not only Catholics, but non-Catholics, you then control them and enroll them as future agents of your mission. And the Jesuits had this mission for a long time. So my book is both historic, bears in the past, but also in the present and in the future. So it exposes also how Pope Francis rigged this election, this conclave. We saw the movie, wonderful movie that came out recently, which depicted this very elaborate election of a pope and how it works behind the scenes. People always think, maybe the Holy Spirit is coming from somewhere and inspiring all these people, but often it's geopolitical interests that make really that push the making of a pope. So he decided this name, and he, from the very first day, and this is very important because when I finished writing this book, I didn't know about Pope Leo XIV. So I was just, predicting what will happen. And in fact, the last chapter of my book is dedicated to the AI robotics, which is a very important subject, which, as you know, I also touched in 3 books, my trilogy, volume 6.66, volume 7, volume 9, which we have discussed on your show, which has also always the courtesy of inviting time. And so I think that your audience has the possibility to always go back to those videos, so to have a more clear understanding. And I've always been denouncing the danger of the AI that could go rogue very easily. And even recently with the OpenAI free, we have a rogue AI that didn't want to be shut down and that starts threatening the engineers, blackmailing them. All kinds of things can happen. And this is only the beginning of a new technology. So this Pope has decided, he said, to call himself Pope Leo XIV based on also the AI revolution, which for him is as big as the Industrial Revolution, which Pope Leo XIII discussed, because Pope Leo XIII in his 1891 encyclica Rerum Novarum outlined the rights of workers for a fair wage, safe working conditions, though he was always opposing atheistic socialism and Freemasonry. He wrote a couple of encyclicas against Freemasonry, Pope Leo XIII. This Pope here has not mentioned Freemasonry, is not opposing it, and probably will never do that, because Pope Francis was in part a Freemason, regardless of what he said in 2023 condemning Freemasonry. This hypocrisy of ecclesiastical Freemasonry is still present in the Vatican, unfortunately, even with Pope Leo XIV.
But don't you think that he is a Freemason and also part of the Illuminati?
Listen, from my experience, all the people who, first of all, like him, have worked in South or Central America, have, first of all, an experience with the Jesuits. And the Jesuits, as I explained, are the ultimate controllers of Freemasonry. But then they have also a different kind of situation in Central and South America, where it's more open to actually receive a bishop or a priest into a lodge of Freemasons. I have seen it with my own eyes in videos, in photos, and I discussed in this book what has happened after the Second Vatican Council, this pivotal moment in the first half of the 60s that changed the church forever, in which the Jesuits and progressive Freemasonry came together and pushed this new union of Marxism and Catholicism, and also what became liberation theology. So the difference between Pope Leo XIII and Pope Leo XIV is obvious, but there is something interesting. Pope Leo XIII was fighting Freemasonry, was fighting the atheists, was fighting all the socialists and all that, but at the same time he had a Secretary of State who was himself a Freemason and a member of what became the OTO of Aleister Crowley. So he was actually Cardinal Rampolla was cited in Oriflame, one of the first publications of the OTO by Theodore Royce, and listed as one of the contacts and members of this order. And in fact, if you go and study the history of the Egyptian rites, you see that this Cardinal Rampolla, who was born in Sicily, near Cefalù, where there was the Abbey of Telema, do what thou wilt, do basically what you want in Crowley's debauchery, and that is where this cardinal came from. And this cardinal was about to become a pope, but suddenly, because of a law that it was a unique law that there was at the time, that the emperor, the Austro-Hungaric emperor, had the possibility of vetoing the vote of a pope. So he intervened to stop the election of Rampolla by stating that the guy was a Freemason. And so we see in this situation, of course, at the moment in the Vatican, the choice of a name that has many many things that can be said about it. I mean, for example, Pope Leo XIII was also the guy who inaugurated the Specula Vaticana, which is the astronomical sector, the continuation of what the Jesuits started centuries before at the Collegium Romanum, and then it was brought all the way to Castel Gandolfo outside of Rome, where is the beautiful lakes outside of Rome, as you know, a spectacular place, where the Jesuits still to this day have this place where they conduct their astronomical research with that famous or infamous telescope known as Lucifer and then later on as Lucy. So we have definitely popes that have been involved with certain things And when you choose a name, you tend to reflect that legacy. So he himself, the Pope has admitted that the day after he was elected, that for him, the world is changing with AI, and it's going to change in a way that is definitely unexpected. And we all know that. We all know that between here to 2030 and 2035, there will be millions of people who will lose their jobs. There will be millions of people who will be affected by this new reality, technological.
Also steered psychologically by the AI superbrain computer, perhaps. But I mean, to just go back a bit, Leo, to because you've said that Pope Francis, and you're not the only one who said that, was supposedly the last pope, but now we have this new pope. So why did you say that Pope Francis was the last pope and the black
Because,
pope?
like I stated in this book, there was a document that last year, on the 13th of June, Pope Francis passed, which described the fact that the whole concept of papacy was artificially created by the Vatican. You see, when the Vatican says we have we are the descendants of Peter by an episcopal lineage that goes all the way to Jesus' disciple, they're implying that at the time of Peter, Peter was recognized as the top of all bishops, as the Pope. That's not the case. In reality, for the first 200 years, everybody knows in real historians, but now the Vatican is also admitting it, that the communities of Christians chose their own bishops and that they were all equal. So there wasn't it wasn't a pyramid. It was rather a circular thing in which they all had the synodality. So why did the papacy suddenly, with Pope Francis, goes and publishes this on their official website? You can go and check. I can send you the document if you want, and kind of puts in questions also a famous historian like Ignatius of Antioch, which, by the way, is the first, I think the first saint that Pope Leo cites immediately after his election, and it's not a chance. Pope Ignatius of Antioch is the guy who the papacy then used 8 centuries ago to justify the primacy of the Pope over everything. And this meant also, we had in the last 500 years, of course, the results of the Reformation. The Jesuits will probably never come around if Martin Luther, Calvin, all the Church of England were not established, because there will have been no use for the Jesuits. The Jesuits managed to become accepted as an order by the Pope in 1540 because they needed secret agents to infiltrate the Reformation, go and kill possibly Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I, as you know, reacted, and she had John Dee, she had other agents, and she formed the nucleus of what is today known as the MI6, the CIS. The 007 name, which I also mentioned in Volume 1, was the name given to John Dee, so he could communicate cryptically, let's say, with Queen Elizabeth. But they were doing it to fight the Jesuits. So there was a war going at the time, and the Catholic Church was losing their image because Rome was decadent back then, just as it was probably in the last few decades, but even more visible, because Martin Luther arrived in Rome and he was from the same order as Pope Leo, an Augustinian friar. And he saw the decadence of Rome, and he suddenly...
So Pope Leo is the first Augustinian pope, or what? I mean,
Absolutely.
is he like a fake kind of pope if Pope Francis was the last pope, in your opinion, and other people?
It's not a question, if you go and check the document which I cited in this book, I called it a ticking time bomb, because Pope Francis and the Jesuits placed this document, this papal-approved dossier produced with the help of the Jesuit order, claims to have the status of a study document, but is indeed a time bomb, carefully calibrated to keep ticking until it detonates the theory and practice of papal supremacy in the Roman Church after the death of Pope Francis and the election of Pope Leo, and that will soon become known only as the Bishop of Rome, eliminating the validity and supremacy of the Patri ministry forever, which is a core tenet of Catholicism, considering it at that point a forgery. And so you would say, but why, after all 2,000 years, they're finally admitting the truth? Because they will not be able to put together all the Christians and then go to the next step, which is unifying Muslim, Jews, Buddhists in a one world religion without the Pope stepping down from his throne. So this document has been published, and this Pope is already in his homilies, and I'm commenting them with articles and published regularly on my site, that he actually said it, he said, I want unity amongst all Christians. It's not about Catholics, it's about all Christians. And
so Leo, let me just jump in here. So
yes.
Do tell the audience who's not aware of these terms, please describe to the audience, what is a Jesuit compared to, let's say, regular Christians? And there are different ways to practice Christianity, of course. So a Jesuit and also a Sabbatean-Frankist. And would you say that the new Pope Leo is both, well, a Jesuit, but also a Sabbatean-Frankist? And is he also a part of the pedophile network?
Okay. So this Pope, let's say you gave me a few questions here, so I would like to answer one at a time. So let's start with the first answer, the difference between a normal priest and a Jesuit. Okay, so a Jesuit takes 4 vows, and a Jesuit is an order which on top has a general, which maybe it's linked to the fact that in 1540, when the Pope approved this order, after arresting, by the way, Ignazio of Loyola for heresy, for a few times he was arrested by the Inquisition. So he wasn't really a good boy. He was with the Alumbrados, the Illuminati of the time. He was practicing magic, esotericism. He went into a cave. I don't know if you ever went to Montserrat, near Barcelona. A beautiful, incredible monastery, which I suggest everybody should go and visit at least once in their life. But that's where Ignazio Loyola in 1522 had his vision with the Holy Mary. But that Holy Mary, in reality, when you go and study the Jesuits, is just a reflection of Isis and the Mother Goddess. So, and the power of ancient Rome is made of paganism, which is reversed in the Catholic Church. So when you ask me what is a Jesuit, a Jesuit is 4 vows means the first 3 vows are the classical vows that most priests take: poverty, chastity, and obedience. Okay? And that's okay. But to make it more appealing for the Pope, Ignazio of Loyola included a 4th vow, which was of total submission to the Pope. Basically, the Pope can order you things that are against your morality, against your religion. Go and kill this guy. And you have to go and kill him. The fact also that they had this pyramid with the general on top was because the Knights Templars, who were a military religious order, had been eliminated, and there was a vacuum in the Catholic Church at the time. So they needed to replace that vacuum with equally militarily fashioned, but not as obvious. Like the Knights Templars were, warrior monks, go around with a sword, they will fight in duels. The Jesuit, no, the Jesuit will appear like a priest and will be almost innocent in your eyes. But then in the night he might come and cut your throat or poison you. So much more similar in a way to the assassins that inspired the Knights Templars, as you know, because we talked about it in the past, but even more insidious. So people have the impression they have in front of them a innocent group of priests, when in reality it's a secret society. And the 4th vow is not taken by all the Jesuits. You see, the Jesuits most Jesuits are 3 vows Jesuits. So they don't go for the mission, because once they go for the missions, they will inevitably be recruited by the Vatican intelligence, which was established in 1566. And it was known as the Holy Alliance, and then later on as the Entity. And those missions, like I repeat, they don't necessarily have to do with Christianity. So the Jesuits immediately went to China, established themselves with the Emperor of China, Japan, a base in Goa. They were working hand in hand with the Portuguese and Spanish empires in the East as well as here in South and Central America. That's why South and Central America are so Jesuit, because it's a colonial legacy to go hand in hand with the Jesuits and the King of Spain or Portugal. But it's also the fact that when the Jesuits were established, it was the time of the Spanish Inquisition, which is one of the most terrible fear. I don't know. I mean, how can we describe this as Spanish? I mean, Monty Python, I think, described it better, in its picturesque, almost exceeding, anything that had to do with religion. They went after anybody who didn't really fit because they wanted to purge the Iberic Peninsula of the Moors, so of the Islamic, and of the Jewish presence. So by doing that, eventually, the Dominicans became the leading force because they were the ones who established the Inquisition. But when the Jesuits arrived, they wanted to steal that legacy from the Dominicans because the Pope saw that the Jesuits knew the occult much better than the Dominicans. They actually were practicing occultists, so why not making the practicing occultists going after the witch or after the magus or after whatever alchemist was practicing things that the church didn't want you to practice?
Yeah, but I just want to jump in here quickly, Leo. But isn't it true that the Knights Templar originally formed the Illuminati in 1776 in order to go against the Vatican and Vatican rule, and then it was later, of course, hijacked.
Think about it for a second. 1776. In 1773, the Jesuit order was suppressed. The Jesuit general was arrested and he was in Castel Sant'Angelo, that beautiful place you have in Rome, But even if he was there, he was still powerful. He was called Lorenzo Ricci. In 1772, the last thing the Jesuits did before getting totally suppressed was to publish The Art of War of Sun Tzu, translating it from Chinese, that then eventually was given to Napoleon, who was an Illuminati. From the moment they were kicked out of the Vatican, they became involved with the Illuminati, the control of the Illuminati, the Knights Templars, the Neo-Templars, who they themselves had helped building up within Freemasonry. In this book, I explain how the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, the high degrees were inspired by the Jesuits. In the College of Clermont, there was in France, but also earlier, and I had confirmation. As soon as I published the book, I was contacted by one of the most eminent Masonic historians of this era. I can't give his name for obvious reason, but he said that what you're saying is confirmed in the Vatican archives and in Washington, because there was a lodge of St. Edward in the 1730s that had Freemasons and Jesuits together. And that nucleus was the nucleus of Jacobite Freemasonry that was trying to reinstall a Catholic monarch into England. So there was a division between Freemasonry that was supporting the Hanoverian cause that eventually won, and the Jacobite, the Catholics, which also were part of my family. My family, the Lion family, as I explained in this book, we went from a sergeant of arms who was himself responsible at the time of Robert the Bruce of moving some of the Templars to Scotland for protection under Robert the Bruce, and then merging with the Scottish aristocracy, and then later on also re-emerging in the Jesuits. In fact, I had the teacher of Pope, I show it here at the end of the book, one of the teachers of Pope Francis, you can go on Wikipedia and check for yourself, this guy here, Carlos Aldunate Lion, a member of my family from Chile, was the master of novices and the teacher of Pope Francis. You can actually go and check on Wikipedia, and it says the teacher of Pope Francis. And his brother, another important Jesuit, was the head of the Jesuits in Chile, which was very important for the development of Pope Francis as a Jesuit.
That's very interesting. And please also address the rest of my question. Explain to the audience just a little bit about what is a Sabbatean-Frankist and Pope Leo is he a Sabbatean-Frankist and part of the pedophile network?
Okay, so first of all, we explain what is a Jesuit. And the Jesuits were formed with also some Jews who helped out, including the secretary of Ignacio Loyola in those early stages before the blood laws, as they were considered back then, very restricted by the Portuguese and Spanish Empire, forbidden to have Jews entering the Jesuit order. However, the Sabbatean-Frankists, as you know, is an heresy that only in the 17th century came around with Shabbatai Zevi and a century later Jacob Frank, who worked hand in hand with the Catholic Church and the Jesuits until themselves also found themselves suppressed, and he himself was arrested by the. So I mean, it was like Jacob Frank, though, became he brought to the Catholic Church something like 20,000 Jewish converts. Now, this heresy, which keeps on unfortunately fomenting also problems in the Middle East, is made out of the bankiers like the Rothschilds, which are undoubtedly always been very close to the Vatican and have been a very important element in the international banking system. So this Pope is an Augustinian, which we said is unusual, but at the same time is a Jesuit agent because he was prepared by this Pope from 2023, and the Jesuits like Father James Martin from American Magazine, if you go and check his Twitter account, and also the publication, the American Jesuit Review, which is the biggest publication of the Jesuits here in America, started to prepare this future Pope, promoting him, because that's why they gave him, even 1 week before the Pope went in February to the hospital, on the 6th of February, this cardinal was given an additional position to make him a papabile, a bishop cardinal, which is like, you know, when you have a general, you have various ranks, and you have the ultimate general. So he became a 4-star general, let's say, in this situation. Now, when you're talking about the Sabbatean-Frankists, they are connected, of course, with the Jewish people, because by blood you have to be Jewish in order to practice even a form of heretical Judaism like Sabbatean-Frankists. So we know that this Pope, at least to our knowledge up until now, has connections instead with the Creole and the Haitian population, which is in a way connected to the Sabbatean-Frankists, as well as the roots of the Scottish Rite, because the grandparents of this Pope were black, and they were practitioners of voodoo and hoodoo. They were coming from Haiti. One of them was born in Haiti, and in Haiti, it used to be, as you know, a French colony. The moment in which it became a free country, those people who worked closely with the French had to leave. And that created that diaspora that then arrived to Louisiana, to places like New Orleans, and became the basis for the voodoo of Louisiana, which is very famous. I mean, nowadays. So this animist element is definitely present, and we know that the Sabbatean-Frankists worked very much always with black magic and with these practices. So there has always been a union. Like, for example, Martinez de Pasquali, who was himself from the same island of Santo Domingo, which is also Haiti, as you know, because it's half one and the other. He himself was a man of color, mixed race, who created the Louis de Cohen, which became an important element within the Illuminati, and then inspired people like Claude de Saint-Martin. So there is a link with the Sabbatean-Frankists, because there is a link, of course, with New Orleans, with magic, that is also underlined by his emblem, which is, of course, you have the Fior d'Ali, which brings you back to New Orleans and to France, which is also a symbol used by the Priory of Zion. And you have the sacred heart with the arrow, which is a symbol of the Augustinians, but it's also a symbol of Catholic Freemasons, which I discussed in volume 4 of my Confessions. So this Pope is a guy who has hidden, if you think about it, initially his black roots, but soon after they were revered and presented to the world. Oh, this Pope is actually black, you know. So a lot of people were telling me, you know, because I said, be ready because the next Pope is going to be black, but not in the sense of a Jesuit, because a black Pope is usually referred to the head of the Jesuits, but black in the sense of a skin, of an ethnicity. And everybody, when they came out of the thing and he looked white, they were like, Leo, no. And instead, after a few days, there were newspapers, even in Italy, saying this is the first black Pope, his grandparents were black. But when they emigrated from New Orleans to Chicago, they changed on paper the race, which is really unusual. They claim to be white suddenly.
Well, he looks white.
Well, but if you see the grandparents, the grandmother didn't look white at all, looked totally black. So it is, of course, a way, you know, for mixed race people, they said that in the South, who emigrated maybe from New Orleans to register with a different ethnicity to be less persecuted, even if you see the photos that were shown of the grandmother, and she clearly has all the signs of being a black woman. However, it's not only that, it's that the fact that they come from New Orleans and the grandfather also from Haiti, and the fact that, of course, all those people who were in the Catholic Church at the time mix elements of animism with the Catholicism, and that's how voodoo, and even in places like Cuba, you have Santeria, or in South America, you have so many animist religions which hide their presence behind the saints of the Catholic Church. Because the Catholic Church is very versatile. It has so many saints that it can become a way to camouflage your actual pagan identity.
So to address the last part of that question, which was, is he also, like some of the other popes, part of the satanic pedophile network?
Thank you for, because you gave me the questions. I was getting lost on the last one. He is definitely, and this I said from day one of his election, has covered the pedophilia network. There is evidence that he did it as a friar, as head of the Augustinians in Chicago, and he did it by covering a pedophile who was not even an Augustinian. He was simply a priest from, I think, a secular priest, but he didn't denounce to the authorities the fact that he was actually guesting him, and he was close to an elementary school, to a school with children. And he let this priest, this predator, stay. And this is something that you should never do. But at the same time, he covered up apparently also for acts of pedophilia that were conducted in his diocese in Peru before his arrival. And when he was himself supposed to denounce this whole thing, there were 3 girls between the age of 7 and 9. I mean, we're talking very young girls who were raped by this priest. And the Pope, the present Pope, as a bishop of Chiclayo in Peru, didn't do anything. He covered up. He just, 6 months before he was elected, SNAP, which is an organization, you know, for the victims of abuse from priests, Catholic priests, denounced this cardinal. So they will not elect him because he said, you know, he has all these skeletons in the closet. Of course, people didn't know that in the meantime, every week in Santa Marta, Pope Francis was meeting with this guy, preparing him for the papacy. So he had like 2 years of constant meetings in which he was, you know, explain how the whole thing works. And because he wasn't really known to the Catholic Bishop Conference, he could also operate in a stealth way because he had been a missionary abroad in South America. He wasn't known by the Catholic bishops. In fact, Cardinal Dolan from New York, a week before the election, said it's impossible we will have ever in the history for the moment a Pope, American Pope, because it will never happen. Then he arrived there to the conclave, and they started, do you know this guy? Who is this guy? Everybody was asking. And the guy said, well, I heard about him, but in America, we don't really know him. So it was even a surprise for the American bishop, for the American cardinals who were in Rome. It was like the Jesuits and Pope Francis had prepared him, and it was kind of like that's why it was such a short conclave. It was like, after one day, that's it, you have the Pope. It's because everything was arranged in a way that the Italians who had hoped for Cardinal Parolin and the other ones who had hoped for this Chinese Filipino guy called Antonio Luis Tagle, who very close also to the Chinese Communist Party, didn't manage to get the right amount of votes, and so then they had to give their votes to this new pope. They were all convinced that because everybody had been preparing well in advance to give. You have to understand that Pope Francis had elevated an enormous amount of cardinals, an unprecedented amount of cardinals. You only need you only need basically 180 cardinals to arrive to the result that we had, and the Pope knew that. So the Pope had elevated cardinals up until December to make possible the complete control of this mechanism. And I think that that's why in this book I said that it was a rigged conclave.
And maybe it was, well, as you say, it was organized and orchestrated from the beginning, and maybe this Pope has been part of a lot of things that we don't know about. And there's a lot still to be seen, obviously, because this is the early stages. But I think before I go into more questions, I didn't even ask a lot already because you can go on and on, Leo, and it's very, very fascinating. But maybe Lauge has some questions from the audience. I don't know if you have any questions from the audience, Lauge.
Yes, we have been fortunate enough to have a few questions here for the audience already. So I have gathered some of them here, and I think we should just start with the first one that was presented. It is the following question. One of our viewers here is asking, I would like to know more about the Sabbatean plan, if I pronounce that correct, in the 1666, and also about the human cloning that is happening.
Okay, can I have the question repeated at the beginning? I didn't understand well.
Yeah, it is about the Sabbatean.
Sabbatean. Okay. And the other part was the
about
clone.
the human. Many people have actually asked about to know more and hear your opinion about human cloning and the elite cloning.
Okay. Sabbatean was a guy whose father, like I explain in my books, especially in volume 10, I would suggest people read volume 10, the last chapter, had been driven by the British interest, because his father was working for the United Kingdom, for Great Britain, and so their interest in British Israelism was to bring back and push back to Israel, to present-day Israel, all the Jews. And they did it following their own interest. The Sabbatean-Frankists, of course, Sabbatai Zevi was Sabbatean because he gave birth to the Sabbatean movement, and his left-hand man was Nathan of Gaza. So then we go back to Gaza. Gaza used to be the stronghold of the Sabbateans once the Rabbinical Council in Jerusalem refused to accept Sabbatai Zevi as the Messiah. This guy declared himself to be the Messiah at the time. Over 1.5 million people in Europe, Jews, followed him. So he had an enormous following. Then in 1666, when he was forced by the head of the Ottoman Empire to convert to Islam, and that happened in 1666, a lot of people, of course, said, how is possible? This guy was the Jewish Messiah and suddenly he converts to Islam. So he lost his credibility. But in reality, a lot of followers kept on following him, and they became the Dommeh, which were these crypto Jews who still exist to this day in Turkey, who practice in their own homes Judaism, but externally they practice Islam. So the actual practice of the Sabbateans was not only an external practice, it became a hidden practice. And what was their practice? On the contrary of a regular Jew, they were doing everything possible that violated the Jewish religion to arrive closer to a messianic era. So eat pork, orgies with sexual magic, because he was actually the guy who's by Alistair Crowley more than anybody else. I mean, all the inspiration.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this is very, well, Aleister Crowley, right?
Yeah, no, but Alistair Crowley came later. Remember, Alistair Crowley was born the year of the foundation of the Theosophical Society. And Madame Blavatsky herself, the founder of the Theosophical Society, was herself a disciple of a Sabbatean called Max Theon, a Jewish Polish guy. And Jacob Frank, let's not forget, was born in Ukraine, and Madame Blavatsky was born in Ukraine. So the modern Satanism is very much connected, as I always said also in volume 9 of my Confessions, to Ukraine is connected to modern Satanism, but also to the Sabbatean-Frankists are connected with the birth of modern Satanism and all these Illuminati sects that went into the search of sexual magic, like the Ordo Templi Orientis and many others. They would have never existed without Sabbatai Zevi creating the base. I mean, Sabbatai Zevi was a guy who went to Italy to find his wife and found a woman who was a prostitute in the Jewish community and married her, and then he will give her in rituals to other people and do all kinds of things that are completely against the... I mean, all this created paradoxically the basis for Zionism. Why? Because Sabbatai Zevi invited all the Jews to go back to Israel. And at the same time, when the Jews started to fight him, they understood this message of going back to Israel, but at the same time, they rejected the heresy very strongly, and that's how they became more orthodox, and they founded the basis for Zionism. And later on, Zionism itself was immediately infiltrated by the Sabbatean-Frankists, and that's the problem with Israel today. Israel, unfortunately, was created by the Sabbatean-Frankists, who fomented the pogroms in Russia, who fomented the Holocaust, who pushed these Jews out of Europe, pushed them to get back there in a land, which, as you know, was up until the Brits had their own colony there, the Palestinian, it was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, as I explained in volume 10 of my Confessions, was sabotaged by the Sabbatean-Frankist lodges who were all over the Middle East. Because, of course, for the crypto-Jews practicing certain forms of Freemasonry, especially esoteric Freemasonry, like the Memphis and Mizra and the Egyptian rites, which are filled with Kabbalah and all that esoteric Jewish lore, it was pretty easy for them. Plus all the practices that were fomented in these secret societies connected to especially the Egyptian rites, which were particularly obsessed later on with sexual magic. And in fact, that's what gave the basis for the OTO. The Egyptian rites of Freemason. John Yarker was the one who gave the patent to Theodore Royce for the foundation of it.
Right. Very interesting. That was a wonderful long answer. Lauge, do you have more questions from the audience?
Yes, I definitely do. And I would like to ask the next question someone has asked here about Constantinople, if we can have a little more information and your thoughts on that, Leo.
Constantinople as what? As Istanbul, as the place which gives us as what? I mean, saying Constantinople only is a little bit restrictive because it will have to be more specific, the question. You see, Turkey is a very particular place. Nicaea was an ancient Greek city, now part of modern Iznik in Turkey. And that is the location of the first and second council of Nicaea. Then you had Istanbul, which of course before being Istanbul was Constantinople, which was a stronghold for the Orthodox. When the churches, you know, there was this schism between the East and the West, the churches, the Eastern churches became the Orthodox churches. It was Constantinople that played a very important part in this division. So if you want to consider the question pertinent to that, I can. But let's not forget that then it became also a stronghold of Islam. And it became a stronghold of Islam and of a specific branch of Islam, Sunni Islam, because people like, the Seljuk Turks, and then later on Saladin, became the most stronger force within Islam that defeated the Shia Fatimids that instead were branching out of Egypt. And even Egypt in the end was converted and forced to submission by them. So we can say that definitely Istanbul and Constantinople, they have a very, very strong relevance in the history.
And of course, it was also the center of the Ottoman Empire.
Absolutely, but that Ottoman Empire that in the end was brought to their knees by a conspiracy, because the Ottoman Empire was brought by a conspiracy. The Young Turks were created in a lodge in Salonico connected to the Sabbatean-Frankists. The actual Rudolf von Zumbuttendorf, the founder of
breaking up here. I don't know.
Can you hear me?
The whole thing is freezing. I don't know if people can see and hear us still. Are we back? Yes. I think we're back, right? Lauge?
Yes. Everything is working fine on this.
Okay. Do you have more questions, Lauge?
Yes, we have another question here about the color black. Many people have asked about this. So I'm just going to present you a few questions here, Leo, and then you can kind of maybe bring them together.
Yes.
So the viewer is asking, is the American Pope the Black Pope? And also, in that sense, are the black nobility Jesuits?
Okay, perfect. I think that is a very interesting question. And we
can have more for Leo just before he goes on.
Yes, we can come with the next. You could start with that question, and then the next question also around.
I think we can mix the two questions because they kind of interchangeable. I mean, they can mix up very easily, because definitely the black nobility is historically the nobility which is closer to the Vatican, and for that reason, within the black nobility, when we saw the rise of the Jesuits as a very influential order, all the most important families wanted to have a Jesuits in their family. And this happened even recently. Dulles, Alan Dulles was the founder of the CIA, the first civilian director. His nephew, actually, the son of his brother, who was a Secretary of State, became a Jesuit. And this was not so long ago. So, I mean, I'm just giving you an example here. Very influential, very influential. So the aristocracy, black aristocracy and the Jesuits hand in hand, because it was a prestigious thing to be in the order of Ignatius Loyola, in the company of Jesus, both for the males and for the females, because as I explain in my book, there is also female Jesuitess. There is orders of nuns who accept the spiritual exercises of Ignatius Loyola and who answer directly to the general of the Jesuits. Now, in regards to the other part of your question, which was...
It was about with it's about the black nobility, if they were Jesuits, and the American Pope.
The American Pope being the Black Pope. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, the American Pope being the Black Pope, yes. I mean, after it was actually described like this, even by American publications, that means that this the description that even Nostradamus gave of a darker Pope. I mean, it's pretty clear, no? I mean, this guy had his grandparents who were black. Now, he might not look as black as other, I mean, you have to understand the complexity also of mixed race and the fact that this Pope came out with that color. If you actually see his brothers, they kind of look a little bit even darker than him in the characteristic physiologic. But I would suggest just to look at the grandparents that are black and that have actually this whole thing of him being black has been embraced and promoted here in America soon after his election. So
but maybe, Leo, it's not about his complexity and his complexion and his color. Maybe it's just about his dark ways, or maybe it's because he's
No,
dark.
no, 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 no. It's both. It's both, I would say. Like I said, it's a bit more insidious than the other one because with this pope we see also, you see, when they were electing this pope, one of the major factors was the contribution of the American Church, which is the major contributor of the Vatican. We're talking cash here. And when they came into the cash thing, and in the conclave, and they started to discuss the fact that the American churches were losing money because this woke church of Pope Francis wasn't working very much, and at the same time, the only way of turning things around was to have an American pope, because at least this guy fitted the two major important areas. The areas of being also a citizen of Peru, of being knowledgeable about the immigrations in South America and Central America, but especially in South America with Venezuela immigrating into Peru. And now all these immigrants arriving, as you know, for the last few years with the Biden administration in America. So a guy who could stand as a major defender of the South and Central America migration, which is the immigration policies, like I explain in my book, are part of the Jesuit policies. So open borders and changing the actual religious landscape and political landscape of America with millions of illegal immigrants, which happened during the Biden administration. So a pope that could intervene and become annoying for Donald J. Trump and his own choice of immigration, which is to close down the border, of course, with a guy, by the way, Tom Homan, who is himself Catholic. So this will. So this pope was chose because of the money, because of the fact that he's American and he could fight Trump as an American who can talk perfectly English, and he could bring also a lot of people back to the churches. Americans, they don't know much about the history of the Vatican. They see the Pope being American, they think, wow, this is great, let's go back to church. You understand? I mean, it's a promotional thing. It becomes like a promotional thing. So that is the reason, I would say.
All right, Lauge, do we have more from the audience?
Yes, I have just a few more that could maybe be of interest to a lot of viewers here. Someone's asking, what is the deepest secret that you, Leo, have on the Illuminati?
The biggest secret is actually, I tend to describe it in the introduction of this book. And it happened when I was back in Rome in 2009, and I was invited at the headquarters of the Jesuits by the Academy of the Illuminati during the promotion of the film Angel and Demons of Ron Howard, because Ron Howard had asked the Illuminati in Rome to help him promote the movie with interviews and other things. So Panorama, which was this important weekly magazine owned by Berlusconi, interviewed us, and then we all went one afternoon while there was Gerard Bruno, which by the way is the guy who then ended up doing the photos which I used for the first 3 volumes of my books. Gerard Bruno, who worked with Andy Warhol, very famous photographer worldwide, one of the biggest photographers for Vanity Fair in the world, who has photographed everybody. He was the photographer in this whole thing. And we went to the Jesuit headquarters, and when I went to Jesuit headquarters and I saw how the Father Superior at the time, Adolf Nicholas, treated people like Pier Giorgio Bassi, who is this Freemason Illuminati, who has a company, who has created this Vatican economic thing with the Linda Rothschild and all these various, big shots. They were basically like little children in front of the Jesuit general. And that was the biggest secret. That was the fact that they were like, in front of the Jesuit general, they were like people who go back to school. And I myself, I studied with the Jesuits when I was a kid. This is, I show you, this is me here next to the professor, you can see me there. That's me. A bit more hair, bit more
Well, it's a
hair.
bit, it's not too clear, Leo. So
Yeah.
just,
But this is, you see, I went to a school and I studied with the Jesuits, just like other people, and this gave me also an idea of how they operate, because they usually manage to brainwash anybody that studies with them, and very rarely people are not brainwashed by them. Like Donald J. Trump studied with them, but he rejected their offers. Even on campus at Fordham, he studied for 2 years theology and philosophy. So
but
there
you
is,
also witnessed satanic rituals and mind control when you were a part of
sure, sure,
the
sure.
lodge in Monte Carlo, right?
Sure, sure, absolutely. They use, of course, what they claim is the ultimate level of neuro-linguistic programming for mind control. They had elaborated NLP-free with a guy called Marco Paré. I worked with a guy called Jean-Pierre Giudicelli de Brissac. All these people are very much acquainted with both the esoteric arts, but also hypnosis, they call it animal magnetism, referring to mesmerism. So mind control is, of course, part of, but the Jesuits, let's not forget, are the ones who are ultimately known as the superior inconnu, the unknown superiors, which all these people go to for advice, just like they did that afternoon. So when you ask me the question now, what is the biggest secret? Well, the biggest secret was revealed to me and confirmed when I saw the level of submission the Illuminati and the Freemasons have for the Jesuits. And I think that is one of the biggest secrets, but also the fact that they themselves were known as the SI, which is a name you can use as superior inconnu, which means unknown superior, but also Società Jesus, meaning Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. So I found them involved with the secret societies, and that is a secret which is kept very, I mean, there is nobody who has written a book about the Jesuits exposing them since the year 2000, with Eric John Phelps wrote Vatican Assassins, in 1999 Saussure wrote Rulers of Evil, and Malachi Martin wrote in 1986 The Jesuits. These are three books before me. In how many years? Why there is no researcher that writes books exposing the Jesuits?
Well, you've written 12 books now about
Yeah,
this, so
no.
this is
In
very
fact, this is the
fascinating.
last book.
And they're all very in depth and profound, and they're quite big books, actually. I have a question here,
This,
Leo.
this ends up the
Talk
series.
about talk about the Jesuit and Vatican connection to the World Economic Forum and the
Sure.
fact that Chairman Klaus Schwab resigned from leadership of this globalist organization just as Pope Francis died. Is there a symbolic connection here because they work with numerology and gematria and, of course, timelines? And how is that connected maybe also to Pope Leo?
Okay, like you know, I wrote a book that I published in 2022, just before our friend Jordan Maxwell died, and in fact, it's a book which I've managed to give him just a couple, and then we talked about it in a great interview that me and Brian Vecchio gave to you. In that book, I talk about the occult secrets of the Great Reset and the religious links with Bishop Camara, the Red Bishop from Brazil, who was invited to Davos in the middle of the 70s, who was the mentor of Klaus Schwab. And this guy was the head of the Pact of the Catacombs, and you can go and check for yourself on the internet what was the Pact of the Catacombs. It was all these South American bishops who reunited at the end of the Second Vatican Council in December 1965 in these catacombs under Rome to conspire and to bring the Second Vatican Council to the ultimate level in which the elements of Marxism and Catholicism, like I said previously, were united. That is their intent that even the Jesuits from the time of Padre Pedro Arrupe had. So, promoting Jesus as a communist. That is, it's no longer Jesus as a king, descendant from King David, who is, a guy of regal lineage. It's more of a socialist Jesus that they have promoted since then. And Klaus Schwab gave up his position when he, of course, was about to be exposed for certain scandals, the illicit use of money within the World Economic Forum and so on the day the Pope died, because, of course, he had accomplished his mission with Pope Francis. Pope Francis was himself a disciple of of the Red Bishop that was the mentor of Klaus Schwab. And so it all fits in, and, by also giving up your position on the day the Pope dies, you know that there is going to be a lot less bad press written about it, because everybody's talking about the death of the Pope. So, it kind of coincided perfectly.
But don't you think it was symbolic also? Don't you think they did that
symbolic also to a certain extent? We can say it's also symbolic, but remember that this is also very practical, because these people are also very practical. They know about practicality. Let's not forget that the son of Klaus Schwab, which still has a very important role, his office is in Beijing, so there is also very much a link with the Chinese Communist Party. Now, this new Pope has just discussed the Chinese Catholics a few days ago. And a lot of people seem to think that because he's starting to discuss the Vatican-China deal, that, as you know, is a secret deal that was signed by Pope Francis, and I've been talking about in my books. And in this book, of course, there's a whole chapter about how this whole thing came together. Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the defrocked cardinal, pedophile cardinal, who was given the possibility by the patriotic church to do whatever he wants, do what thou wilt, in his own seminaries of the patriotic in China. Now, all this is very important to understand that ultimately China has been giving money to the Catholic Church, and so they wanted to have a say in this conclave, but at the same time, America, of course, had a very important role since the 50s onwards, especially since 1958, in the elections of the popes, since 1958 and the election of Pope John the 23rd. So I think that altogether we have now a church which is kind of like, with this Pope, balancing between this more woke side, which Pope Francis was very open about, very much leaning towards China, leaning towards all the politics of the left, the Democratic Party, Nancy Pelosi, supporting everything that one. And then you have the conservative side, which this Pope is trying to, in a way, get back into the fold, because they need the money. They can't just have this hemorrhage of conservative Catholics going on.
So Lauge was asking a question from one of the audience members about human cloning. I don't know exactly what the question was, but your thoughts on human cloning and how the Vatican and the Jesuits are involved, was that the question, Lauge? Or what
Yes,
was it?
many people one of our viewers has asked about human cloning, and they really want to know what your knowledge is about the elite being able to clone humans, and also about the front figures, politicians and the other people that we see, that maybe they have been cloned and which version they are on, and what are your knowledge on that?
Name names, Leo. We want them.
No. Well, in regards to cloning, I never had a direct experience. I know that technologically, medically, the advances from the 1990s onwards have permitted this. In secret, there has been cloning going on. I know that, for example, in China, this has been done so they can sell the organs, which is a very bad thing that they do, the traffic of organs, also for rich people who want to simply substitute part of their body. So you just get but to actually have substitutes full on, as you know, the internet legends, so to speak, or urban legends talk about in the last few years, that I never had any confirmation. However, anything that is scientific can be brought back to the Jesuits. Let's not forget the role of Dr. Fauci, a Jesuit, basically a fifth-class Jesuit agent, somebody who teaches at Georgetown, who was brought up at Fordham, and who is a guy who has a key role in what we know was, of course, the plan then. So that is what I can
But
tell.
supposedly, human cloning has been possible for decades, and
Yes,
military, of
absolutely.
course, has
But
technology that is so advanced, way ahead in the future that we're not allowed to hear about. And they also talk about, this is obviously what one of the audience members were asking about, politicians and other figures that may not be that version of themselves. Some people have said,
I know that politicians.
let me just finish this one, Leo.
Yeah, no, but
Some people have said that
no, but I want to be very
Clinton
clear.
or Donald
Yes,
Trump and others are not the version that they were originally.
Lucas, I'm a journalist and an author who focuses my books on facts that I can prove. That's why my book is becoming a bestseller. It's been number one.
But
in
you know we
several
cannot
countries.
prove everything. We've talked about this before.
No, but that's why I don't write of things I don't have certainty, and that's why I didn't touch the subjects in my writings, and that's why I'm
Is that
very
because it's too delicate and you think it's too dangerous?
No, absolutely. It's just because I didn't have a direct experience. I can write about things I have direct experiences, and I have the documents to prove them. If I don't have those documents and the direct experiences, I can't speculate. It's not. I'm not.
So you will not allow yourself to speculate here.
No, because in my experience, already what I have been able to prove is enough. Then, of course, if we want to go the next step and speculate, then that will become another form also of investigation. And like I said, I want to fight the system with books that can challenge them. If you go and check the reviews for this book and the ratings for this book in categories which the Jesuits, of course, are horrified now, because when you have a book which is number one in historical essays, number one in religious essays, or faith and spirituality, that is what challenges the Jesuits. By speculating about things you can't prove, well, you simply go and diminish your relevance. I'm fighting the system.
Well, that's not so. Look at David Icke and his popularity.
But
he talks about everything and does not shy away of speaking.
Lucas, I have been accused of espionage in Norway. David Icke has not. I was arrested and tortured. David Icke was not. I had to flee a country. David Icke has not. So the difference is that I can prove that what I did has made a big effect. And that's why I had to flee even a country, change my citizenship. David Icke is still living very much, I think, the Isle of Wight or wherever he's living, in a very tranquil setup. I never can do that. So there is a difference there. And you know, if he was, of course, persecuted, he was persecuted because of certain problems he created with his stand on the so-called Zionist, which himself, though, later on corrected
and that's the reason why he's not allowed to speak in Europe and different countries.
Yeah, absolutely. But he himself corrected later on, talking about the Sabbatean-Frankists, and his channel, Iconic, invited me several times to discuss these topics.
So in our remaining moments, unless there's something important, Lauge, then I just think we need to end and wrap up with the best possible advice for our future. We are now in 2025, and a lot is going on. The world is changing, and where do you see us in a couple of years? Is UN Agenda 2030 going to be successful, and the New World Order plan, or do you think that can all be changed and we can get rid of all of that?
Getting rid of all of that is almost impossible. We can just hope that a minority of us can go off the grid and survive what is coming, because once the AI takes control even of the political arena, which is going to happen between 2030 and 2035, there is, we are forced into something that even the Pope acknowledged. Like I said, his name was inspired by a choice which he said is due. But the thing is that they want to control the Jesuits, the narrative. They want to control the ethics and morals that they supposedly have for dominating the AI of the future. I personally think that what is happening here is a genie that is coming out of the box. And once it's out, it's going to be very difficult to. And the fact that the Chinese want to place before 2030 a robot for each family, the fact that there will be basically a threat to mankind, that is where we're heading here. So that is the reality of it, regardless of the cloning or whatever speculations that are made. I want to stick to the facts. And what we know about quantum computers and what is happening, even with the notion of cyber Satan being an alien thing, because I mean, here we're talking also about the fact that Jesuits have been leaders in the astronomical sector. They even wrote books about how they can baptize an extraterrestrial, but in reality, there is a real extraterrestrial threat which is represented by the technological digital prison which is being built around us. And I have, as you know, discussed this also in my previous books. So I think that is the major topic here, the very future of mankind, and the fact that a lot of people will be inclined to embrace transhumanism, and from there on, the merging of the man with the machine, which I think is a monstrosity.
It is absolutely, and we would like to stop that, obviously. But what's the best, if you don't think we can stop it, if you don't think that.
I said off the grid, create realities which are off the grid with like-minded people. So when the smart cities of the future will become, this, almost like in the old feudal times, you had the castle, and then you had people living outside of those, surrounded the castle with big walls and stuff that lives with certain rules. I think that is possible for people who are like-minded to still create communities that will not embrace this monstrosity.
Let's hope so, and we pray that that's going to happen in a good way, and that also we can change the whole thing. Let's work for a change, all of us, so that all of that is not going to happen. But anyway, this was a fiery and fascinating live discussion today, Leo. And you're out with your last Confessions of an Illuminati book, volume 12.
I hope it's not.
Let me just finish this one. History, Secret Societies, and Politics of the Jesuit New World Order and the Luciferian Court. And you're, show the cover.
This is the cover. It's all full of symbolism. As you can see, this is the eye, and it's actually the eye of Lucifer that comes from this painting. And here we have a painting that is in the Mother Church of the Jesuits, which is actually very symbolic because it represents Jesus, which gives a red flag to Ignacio Loyola, symbolizing the very origins of communism. And then, in fact, I put the symbol of communism there right at the top, and I transformed one of the disciples in Karl Marx. But you have to, of course, check out the cover for yourself to look at these nuances. I want to thank Vincenzo Viceversa, who is the graphic master who has provided. He actually is an artist who lives in Umbria, which, as you know, is a fantastic region of Italy, merged with the religion, and so it's very close to this reality. I think that is important for us to understand that there is many beauties in this world, no? And that we can still keep a beautiful world close to us. But of course, the machine needs to be kept under control, and it's kind of like the ghost in the machine is coming out of the machine, and the future is uncertain. But at least we, our families, our friends, can be kept aware, especially with projects like yours at Age of Truth. So I thank you so much for having me on today, and also Al for his always great technical collaboration. Thank you so much for the questions, and we will speak soon. It will no longer be my next book, part of my Illuminati Confessions, because with these 12 books, I completed the description of this pyramid with the all-seeing eye, which is represented in the volume 12. And then at that point, we will go for the analysis of further subjects of interest in other books.
I'm sure you'll do something and create like you always do. It's always fascinating to have you on. Thank you once again, Leo Zagami, for being on Age of Truth TV.
Thank you, guys. Take care. God bless you all.
Thank you very much to Leo Sagami, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please like our video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. You can sign up for our newsletter on our website, ageoftruth.tv as well. And please also subscribe to our alternative channels on BitChute and Brighteon. Your support is greatly appreciated and very needed. And on behalf of the Age of Truth TV team and Lauge, say bye, Lauge.
Thank you all for joining our live stream here. It was great with all your great questions. And unfortunately, we couldn't go around all of them, but we will definitely be on another live stream very soon again. And we look forward to hear from you also on our webpage. And you're always welcome to ask us any questions on our emails. And you will find all the information on our webpage, ageoftruth.tv. Thank you so much for joining tonight.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for joining us on this live chat. Have a great day, have a great morning, have a great evening, wherever you are.